The wind howled outside at 40 below zero. Every cabin in the Wyoming Valley had fires burning through the night. Trappers waking every few hours to add wood, never getting proper sleep, all was cold despite the flames. Every cabin except one. In that cabin there was no fire. The hearth was cold. The chimney produced no smoke, and the man inside, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by carefully positioned stones, slept soundly through the night in warmth that defied explanation. The year was 1852, and what Marcus Webb had discovered about heat storage would get him called a fraud, accused of burning invisible fires and nearly driven out of the territory by men who could not believe what they were seeing. But his hot rock trick would eventually save 83 lives and change how people survived in places where firewood was scarce or impossible to burn safely. The secret: heat does not have to come from fire. It just has to come from somewhere hotter than you. Marcus Webb was born in Pennsylvania in 1824. His father was a blacksmith, and Marcus grew up around the forge, watching metal heat and cool, learning intuitively how different materials held heat. Iron heated fast and cooled fast. Steel held heat longer. But stone, the stone hearth his father built the forge on, that stayed hot for hours after the fire died. Young Marcus noticed that the stone floor near the forge stayed warm long into the evening. On cold nights, the family cat would sleep on that stone, soaking up heat that had been absorbed during the day. The stone was not generating heat. It was storing heat from the forge and releasing it slowly through the night. This observation, made when Marcus was 12 years old, would save his life 30 years later. In 1847, at age 23, Marcus headed west. He joined a fur-trapping brigade and spent 5 years learning the mountains. He was a methodical trapper, not the most productive, but reliable and observant. He watched everything, especially how heat behaved in different conditions. He noticed that south-facing rock walls stayed warm long after sunset, having absorbed sun all day. He noticed that river rocks in shallow water were warm to the touch in late afternoon from sun heating. He noticed that the large boulders scattered through the mountains radiated warmth on summer evenings. Stone absorbed heat and released it slowly. This was not new knowledge, but most people did not think about how to use it systematically. Marcus built his first solo cabin in autumn of 1852 in a valley in Wyoming Territory. He followed standard practices with one modification. He built an unusually large and elaborate hearth and chimney structure, not for better draft or more efficient burning, for thermal mass. The stone structure weighed approximately 8 tons. It occupied the center of his small cabin, a massive presence that seemed oversized for the space. Other trappers who saw it asked why he had built such an enormous fireplace. "For heat storage," Marcus replied. "You store heat by keeping a fire going, not by building a mountain of rocks." The rocks store heat from the fire. Then they release it slowly. I build one good fire, and the rocks keep me warm for hours after. That is just a normal fireplace with extra steps. Everyone knows stone holds heat a while. So what? So what if I could make it hold heat all night? What if I did not need to keep a fire burning to stay warm? The other trappers laughed. Stone does not hold heat all night. It cools down. Then you freeze. You are going to wake up at midnight freezing and scrambling to restart your fire. Oui, comme moi. But Marcus had a plan they did not understand yet. His system worked like this. Every afternoon he built a hot fire in his hearth. Not a fire for cooking or comfort, a fire specifically designed to heat the massive stone structure to the highest temperature possible. He burned seasoned hardwood that produced intense heat. He maintained the fire for 3 to 4 hours, getting the stones thoroughly heated. The surface stones would get hot enough that you could not touch them. The inner stones, insulated by the outer layers, would heat more slowly, but would reach high temperatures, and, critically, would hold that heat for many hours. By evening, the stone mass was fully charged with thermal energy. Then Marcus did something the other trappers thought was insane. He let the fire die completely. No overnight fire, no banking of coals, just letting it go out. And he went to bed. The massive stone structure, now containing an enormous amount of thermal energy, began releasing that heat into the cabin. The release was slow and steady. The outer stones cooled first, radiating their heat. As they cooled, heat flowed from the hotter inner stones to replace it. The thermal gradient within the stone mass meant heat continued flowing outward for hours. Marcus had done calculations based on his blacksmith experience. 8 tons of granite heated to approximately 200 degrees Fahrenheit and then allowed to cool in a cabin at 0 degrees would release heat steadily for 8 to 12 hours before cooling to ambient temperature, more than enough to sleep through the night. The first test came in November. Temperature dropped to 20 below. Marcus heated his stones in the afternoon, let the fire die at sunset, and went to bed. He positioned himself near the stone mass, close enough to feel the radiant heat, but not so close as to be uncomfortable. He slept through the night. When he woke at dawn, the cabin was cool but not freezing. The stone mass was still slightly warm to the touch. He had survived the night with 0 firewood consumption after sunset. No waking to tend the fire, no fear of the fire going out, just steady heat from stored thermal energy. He continued the experiment through early winter. Every day the same pattern. Afternoon fire to charge the thermal mass, evening shutdown, night sleeping warm from radiated heat, morning restart. His firewood consumption was half that of traditional trappers because he only burned during the charging phase, not all night. The other trappers noticed the lack of smoke from his chimney at night. They came to investigate, expecting to find Marcus freezing or secretly burning some kind of smokeless fuel. Instead, they found him comfortable, the hearth cold, the cabin warmer than it should be. "How are you doing this?" Ben Crawford demanded. "There is no fire. Your cabin should be freezing, but it is warm." "The stones," Marcus explained. "I heat them in the afternoon. They release heat all night." "Stones do not hold heat that long. You are lying." "Feel the stones. They are still warm. That is where the heat is coming from." Ben touched the stone mass. It was warm, noticeably warmer than the cabin air. "This is some kind of trick. You must have a hidden fire somewhere." "There is no hidden fire, only stored heat." "Then you are using some kind of coal or charcoal that burns without smoke." "I am using nothing at night. The heat is from this afternoon's fire. The stones store it and release it slowly." Ben shook his head. "I do not believe it. This violates nature. Heat from rocks? That makes no sense." But the evidence was undeniable. No fire, no smoke, no visible heat source, just warm stones and a warm cabin. The other trappers could not explain it, so they decided Marcus was lying or using some trick he would not admit to. The mockery intensified through December. Marcus's neighbors started calling him Hot Rock Webb. They made jokes about him worshiping stones. They suggested he had found some magical rocks that generated their own heat. They refused to believe the simple explanation that he was just storing heat efficiently. "He probably wakes up every hour and rebuilds the fire, then puts it out before anyone sees the smoke," one trapper theorized. "He is using some kind of chemical that releases heat without burning," another suggested. "He is just tougher than the rest of us and sleeps cold, but will not admit it," a third claimed. None of them considered that Marcus had simply applied principles of thermal mass more systematically than anyone else. The idea was too simple. There had to be a trick, a secret, something he was hiding. The situation became hostile in January when Marcus tried to teach the technique to a young trapper named David Stone, who was struggling to keep his poorly built cabin warm. Marcus explained the principles, helped David modify his small fireplace to include more thermal mass, taught him the heating and cooling cycles. David's firewood consumption dropped dramatically. His cabin was warmer at night. He confirmed that Marcus's method worked exactly as described, but instead of convincing the other trappers, this somehow made them angrier. "You are spreading your lies to others now," Ben Crawford accused Marcus, "leading inexperienced men to their deaths with your crazy rock heating. What happens when those rocks do not hold heat? When Stone freezes to death in his cabin because he believed your nonsense?" "The method works," Marcus replied. "David is warmer and using less firewood. The evidence is clear." "The evidence is that you have convinced someone else to try your dangerous experiment. When he dies, his blood will be on your hands." But David did not die. He thrived, and he told others. Slowly, cautiously, a few more trappers tried the thermal mass heating method. They modified their fireplaces, built up thermal mass, learned the charging and release cycles. Every single one reported the same results: less firewood, warmer nights, no fires needed after dark. The winter of 1852 to 1853 was moderate. Thermal mass heating worked, but it was not tested under extreme conditions. The true validation came the following winter. If you are fascinated by these forgotten heating techniques that used physics and observation instead of modern technology, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We uncover the ingenious solutions that helped people survive in impossible conditions using nothing but understanding of natural principles. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next exploration. The winter of 1853 to 1854 was catastrophic. It started early, hit hard, and did not relent. By December, temperatures were regularly hitting 50 below zero. Blizzards were constant, and crucially, the snow was so deep that getting to timber for firewood became nearly impossible. Trappers who normally could cut and haul firewood whenever needed found themselves trapped by snow that was waist-deep or deeper. The effort to break trail to trees, cut wood, and haul it back through deep snow was exhausting and dangerous. Several trappers got lost in whiteout conditions and nearly died. Firewood, normally abundant, became scarce. Traditional heating methods required constant firewood. A trapper burning all night every night needed enormous wood supplies. As the winter progressed and wood became harder to get, people began rationing firewood, burning less, staying colder. Some ran out of wood entirely and faced freezing to death. Marcus and the trappers, using his thermal mass method, were in a completely different situation. They needed firewood for only 3 to 4 hours per day, not 24 hours. Their consumption was 1/4 to 1/5 that of traditional heating. When others were running out of wood, they had plenty. When others were making desperate trips through deadly conditions to get more wood, they were staying safely in their cabins. More importantly, thermal mass heating was more efficient with the wood it did burn. The concentrated, intense fire used for charging the thermal mass extracted more heat from each log than a low, smoldering overnight fire. Less wood produced more stored heat. By late January, the situation was desperate for many trappers. A family of 4, the Hendersons, who had built a cabin in the valley that autumn, ran completely out of firewood. They had 3 children, the youngest only 4 years old. The father, Robert Henderson, tried to reach timber, but got lost in a blizzard and barely made it back alive. They were going to freeze. Marcus Webb made the trip to their cabin, struggling through deep snow, and found them huddled together trying to stay warm, with no fire. He explained thermal mass heating and offered to help them modify their fireplace. "We have no firewood," Robert said. "Your method requires fire to heat the rocks. We have nothing to burn." "I brought enough wood for 3 days," Marcus replied. "We will use my wood to heat your stones. Once they are hot, we maintain the charge with minimal wood. Your consumption will drop so low that you can gather enough wood to keep going." They had nothing to lose. Marcus and Robert tore apart some interior walls to add stone mass to the small fireplace. It was not ideal, but it was enough. They built a hot fire using Marcus's wood. After 4 hours, The stones were heated, they let the fire die and waited. The cabin, which had been freezing, warmed up, not hot, but comfortable, livable. The children stopped shivering. Through the night, the cabin stayed warm enough to sleep. In the morning, they rebuilt the fire, charged the stones again, and repeated the cycle. Over the next week, Robert was able to make short trips to gather small amounts of firewood. The reduced consumption meant even limited wood gathering was sufficient. The family survived because thermal mass heating required so little fuel. Word spread. Desperate families sought out Marcus or David Stone or the other trappers using the method. They learned the technique. They modified their fireplaces. They adapted to the new heating approach. Survival became possible. By the end of that terrible winter, 83 people were alive who would have died using traditional heating methods. They survived because thermal mass heating required less wood than they could have possibly gathered under those conditions. The technique had proven itself under the most extreme test imaginable. When spring came, the hostility toward Marcus evaporated. The trappers who had mocked him, who had called him a fraud, who had accused him of spreading dangerous lies, they all asked to learn the method. The evidence was overwhelming. Thermal mass heating worked. It saved lives. The mockery had been wrong. Marcus taught the method to anyone willing to learn. He emphasized the principles, not just the procedures. The key was understanding heat capacity, thermal mass, and heat transfer rates. Stone has high heat capacity, meaning it can absorb a large amount of heat energy for each degree of temperature increase. A pound of granite can absorb about 0.2 BTUs of heat energy per degree Fahrenheit. 8 tons of stone, 16,000 pounds, heated from 60 degrees to 200 degrees, absorbs approximately 448,000 BTUs of energy. That stored energy is then released as the stone cools. The rate of release depends on the temperature difference between the stone and the surrounding air, and on the surface area of the stone. A large thermal mass releases heat slowly, maintaining warmth for many hours. The charging fire needed to be hot and sustained. A weak fire did not heat the stone mass deeply. Only the surface stones would warm and they would cool quickly. A hot fire penetrating deep into the thermal mass created a reservoir of heat that would last all night. The positioning of the thermal mass mattered. Central placement in the cabin meant heat radiated in all directions into the living space. Placement against an exterior wall meant half the heat was wasted to the outside. Marcus had learned this from his father's forge. The stone hearth under the forge was more effective than a stone wall behind it. The insulation of the cabin mattered enormously. Heat stored in stones was useless. If the cabin leaked that heat to the outside faster than the stones could replace it, thermal mass heating worked best in well-insulated cabins. This meant that adding thermal mass often needed to be combined with improving chinking, sealing gaps, and blocking drafts. The type of stone made some difference. Dense stones like granite and basalt had better heat capacity than porous stones like sandstone or limestone. River rocks were excellent because they were dense and weathered smooth. Fractured or layered stones could crack under thermal stress and should be avoided. The fire management required practice. To cool a fire wasted time and wood without adequately charging the thermal mass. Too hot a fire could crack stones or create dangerous situations. The ideal was a controlled, intense fire that heated the stones thoroughly without exceeding their thermal limits. The safety considerations were important. The stone mass surface temperature during charging could reach 180 to 200 degrees. This was hot enough to cause burns. Children and pets needed to be kept away during charging. The stones needed time to cool to safe surface temperatures before anyone could sleep near them. The ventilation during charging mattered. A hot fire consumed oxygen and produced smoke. Adequate ventilation prevented carbon monoxide buildup. But after the fire died and the cabin was running on stored thermal heat, ventilation could be reduced to minimize heat loss while maintaining enough air exchange for breathing. The seasonal adaptation was necessary. Thermal mass heating worked best in deep winter when nights were long and cold. In autumn or spring, when nights were shorter and temperatures milder, less thermal mass was needed. Some users built systems with removable stones, adding mass in winter and removing it in warmer months. The construction techniques spread quickly. Trappers taught settlers. Settlers taught neighbors. The knowledge moved through informal networks, adapting to local conditions and materials. Within 5 years, thermal mass heating was common practice throughout the northern mountain territories. Regional variations emerged. In areas with limited stone, builders used adobe bricks or water-filled metal containers. In forested areas, some builders combined thermal mass with other heating methods. In extremely cold regions, even larger thermal masses were built, some weighing 10 to 15 tons. The military adopted the technique for frontier outposts. Army engineers formalized the design, creating standardized plans for thermal mass heating systems. The reduced firewood consumption meant easier logistics and supply. Outposts could be maintained in locations where firewood was scarce. Miners working claims above tree line, where firewood was non-existent, used thermal mass systems heated by coal or other fuels carried up from lower elevations. The efficiency meant limited fuel could provide adequate heating. Railroad construction crews building through high passes used thermal mass heating in temporary camps. The technique allowed occupation of sites where traditional wood heating was impractical. Lighthouse keepers in cold climates adopted thermal mass heating. The 24-hour operation of lighthouses made constant fire tending difficult. Thermal mass systems could be charged during day shifts and provide heat through night shifts without fire tending. The scientific community studied the phenomenon in the late 1800s. Physicists calculated the heat capacity of various stones and measured the heat release rates. The mathematics confirmed what Marcus had learned through observation. His system was thermodynamically sound. Scientists also studied optimization. They calculated the ideal ratio of thermal mass to cabin volume. Too little mass provided insufficient heat storage. Too much mass required excessive fuel to charge and had diminishing returns. The optimal ratio was approximately 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of stone per 100 cubic feet of cabin space. Modern passive solar design uses the same principles. Thermal mass in the form of concrete floors or masonry walls absorbs heat from sunlight during the day and releases it at night. The concept that Marcus developed for wood-fired heating works equally well for solar heating. Contemporary off-grid housing often includes thermal mass heating. Masonry heaters, rocket mass heaters, and similar designs heat large amounts of masonry with short, intense fires, then rely on thermal mass to provide heat for hours. These are direct descendants of Marcus Webb's hot rock technique. If you're enjoying this deep dive into brilliant frontier engineering that solved complex problems with simple physics, this is exactly what we do here. We find the forgotten innovations that kept people alive using nothing but observation and understanding. Subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration of historical ingenuity. The economic advantage of thermal mass heating remained significant throughout the late 1800s. Reduced firewood consumption meant reduced labor. Time saved on wood cutting could be spent on productive activities. For trappers, more time trapping meant more income. For settlers, more time farming meant better yields. The comfort improvement was equally valuable. Thermal mass heating provided more even temperatures than fire heating. Instead of being hot near the fire and cold away from it, the whole cabin reached a moderate, comfortable temperature. The radiant heat from warm stones was gentler and more comfortable than the intense heat from flames. The sleep quality improved dramatically. No need to wake during the night to tend the fire. No anxiety about the fire going out and freezing before morning, no smoke or noise from crackling wood, just steady, quiet warmth from thermal mass, allowing deep, restful sleep. The safety benefits were substantial. No overnight fires meant no risk of the fire spreading or embers escaping and igniting the cabin. The stones, once heated, posed no fire risk. Children and pets were safer because there were no open flames to investigate or fall into during the night. The environmental impact was positive. Reduced wood consumption meant less pressure on local forests. Sustainable wood harvest became easier when consumption was 1/4 to 1/5 of traditional levels. This allowed forests to regenerate and maintain fuel supplies over longer periods. The technique even influenced urban architecture. Some city buildings in cold climates incorporated large masonry masses that were heated during the day and radiated warmth at night. The principles worked regardless of scale, a cabin or a mansion. Thermal mass provided efficient heating. The durability of thermal mass systems was excellent. Stone lasts indefinitely, if not fractured. Systems built in the 1850s were still functional in the 1950s. No maintenance was required beyond occasional mortar repair. The longevity compared favorably to metal stoves that rusted or fire bricks that crumbled. The adaptability to different fuels was advantageous. Thermal mass could be charged with wood, coal, peat, dried dung, or any combustible material. As fuel availability changed, the system adapted. This flexibility meant users were not dependent on a single fuel source. The teaching methods evolved as the technique spread. Early adopters like Marcus taught through demonstration. Later teachers developed more systematic instruction. Some wrote descriptions or drew diagrams. The knowledge became more formalized while maintaining the practical focus that made it effective. The social impact extended beyond individual survival. Communities using thermal mass heating had more time for social activities because less time was spent on fuel gathering, winter gatherings, storytelling, mutual aid. All became easier when survival was not consuming all available time and energy. The decline of thermal mass heating came with modern heating technology. Oil furnaces, gas heaters, and electric heating made warmth available without any user effort. The convenience overwhelmed the efficiency advantages of thermal mass. By the mid-20th century, active heating had replaced passive thermal mass in most applications. But the knowledge never disappeared entirely. In remote areas, in off-grid communities, among people interested in self-sufficient living, thermal mass heating remained known and practiced. The technique survived as alternative knowledge outside mainstream practice, but never quite forgotten. The modern resurgence came with interest in sustainable living and energy independence. People rediscovered that thermal mass heating required no electricity, no fossil fuels, no complex equipment, just stone, fire, and understanding. In an uncertain world, such independence has value. Marcus Webb died in 1881 at age 57. He spent his later years helping settlers build efficient heating systems, teaching the principles he had discovered, sharing knowledge freely. He never profited from his innovation. He simply helped people survive better. His legacy is not in monuments or fame. His legacy is in the knowledge that spread from his hot rock trick, knowledge that saved 83 lives directly and thousands more indirectly, knowledge that made winter survival easier for countless families, knowledge that proved heat could be stored and used efficiently without constant fire. The principle is simple. Heat capacity exists. Thermal mass stores energy. Release is slow and steady. These physics truths do not change with time or technology. They worked in 1852. They work now. They will work forever. The mockery that Marcus faced, the hot rock nickname, the accusations of fraud, all of it came from people who could not believe something so simple could work so well. Complex problems must have complex solutions, they thought, but they were wrong. Sometimes the best solutions are elegantly simple. Heat rocks during the day, sleep warm through the night with no fire. That was the trick. That was always the trick. Not magic, not fraud, not hidden secrets, just thermal mass, just physics, just observation and experimentation producing a solution that worked better than anyone expected. The hot rocks that seemed laughable turned out to be brilliant. The man they mocked turned out to be right. And the warmth from stones heated hours earlier, radiating through cold winter nights, keeping people alive and comfortable without flame or smoke, that warmth proved that understanding beats tradition, that innovation comes from observation, and that the simplest solutions often work the best. Marcus Webb slept warm with no fire, not because he was tougher than others, not because he used tricks or secrets, but because he understood heat and used that understanding to store it in stone. They mocked him until they needed him. Then they learned from him. And the knowledge he shared kept burning, not in fires, but in the minds of everyone who learned that heat does not have to come from flames. It just has to come from somewhere hotter than you. And 8 tons of sun-warmed stone, properly charged, is plenty hot enough. The hot rock trick. Simple, elegant, effective. That is how you survive winter when firewood is scarce and nights are long. You store heat when you can and release it when you need it. Marcus Webb figured it out. 83 people lived because he did, and the knowledge survives, waiting for anyone wise enough to use it. The rocks hold heat. The heat keeps you warm. The warmth keeps you alive. That is all the magic there ever was.